Croatia, a land of stunning coastlines and ancient cities, holds a history scarred by conflict. While the horrors of World War II are well documented, a darker, less-known chapter lies buried in the aftermath. This is the story of Tito's rise to power and the brutal suppression of dissent in post-war Croatia. This period, shrouded in silence for decades, reveals a tale of political repression, targeted killings, and stolen lands. The whispers of these injustices, passed down through generations, are finally breaking free. The triumph against Nazi Germany in 1945 brought little solace to many Croatians. Instead of liberation, they faced a new form of tyranny under the communist regime of Josip Broz Tito. This period, often romanticized as a golden age of unity and prosperity, bore a sinister underbelly. For many, it was an era of fear, marked by the crushing weight of state-sanctioned violence and the systematic silencing of opposition. The true cost of Tito's rule, hidden for decades, is now slowly coming to light. Uncovering this hidden history is a painful but necessary process. It involves confronting uncomfortable truths and acknowledging the suffering of those who were silenced. The stories of those who lived through this period, often whispered in hushed tones, paint a stark picture of life under Tito's iron fist. Their accounts, filled with fear and loss, reveal the human cost of totalitarian rule. This is not merely an academic exercise in revisiting the past. Understanding the depth of repression under Tito's regime is crucial for reconciling with Croatia's troubled history. Only by bringing these hidden stories to light can we truly understand the complexities of the past and build a future based on truth and reconciliation. This is a journey into the heart of Tito's shadows, a journey that will illuminate the resilience of the human spirit in the face of oppression. Josip Broz Tito, a charismatic and enigmatic figure, emerged from the ashes of World War II as the undisputed leader of Yugoslavia. As a prominent partisan leader during the war, he skillfully navigated the complex political landscape, forging alliances and eliminating rivals. Tito's wartime exploits, shrouded in both heroism and ruthlessness, laid the foundation for his ascent to absolute power. His image as a strong leader resonated with a war-weary population yearning for stability and a unified national identity. However, beneath the veneer of unity and progress, Tito harbored a deep-seated paranoia and an unyielding grip on power. He viewed any form of opposition, real or perceived, as a direct threat to his authority and the socialist state he was building. To consolidate his control, Tito established a vast security apparatus, the infamous UDBA, tasked with rooting out dissent and maintaining his iron grip. The UDBA, operating with impunity, became the instrument of terror, silencing any voice that dared to challenge the regime. Tito's tactics for maintaining control extended beyond overt violence. He implemented a sophisticated system of propaganda and indoctrination, shaping the narrative to his advantage. Schools, media, and cultural institutions were transformed into mouthpieces of the regime, disseminating the official party line and suppressing alternative viewpoints. This pervasive propaganda machine effectively stifled critical thinking and fostered an atmosphere of unquestioning obedience. Through these methods, Tito created a climate of fear that permeated every aspect of Croatian society. People were encouraged to inform on their neighbors, colleagues, even family members, for any perceived disloyalty to the regime. This culture of suspicion and distrust eroded social bonds and created a chilling effect on free speech and open dialogue. Under Tito, Croatia became a nation where dissent was not merely discouraged, it was ruthlessly extinguished. The suppression of dissent under Tito's regime was swift and brutal. Political opponents, regardless of their ideology or the nature of their dissent, were targeted and silenced. This included members of the former Croatian government, intellectuals, artists, and anyone suspected of harboring anti-communist sentiments. The methods employed ranged from intimidation and harassment to imprisonment, torture, and extrajudicial killings. The judiciary, far from being an independent arbiter of justice, became a tool of the regime, rubber-stamping politically motivated prosecutions. Show trials were commonplace, serving as public spectacles to intimidate potential dissenters and demonstrate the consequences of challenging Tito's authority. The accused were often denied basic legal rights, subjected to coerced confessions, and sentenced to lengthy prison terms or even death. One of the most notorious examples of political repression was the persecution of the Croatian Peasant Party, HSS. The HSS, a popular pre-war political party advocating for Croatian autonomy, was deemed a threat to Tito's vision of a centralized Yugoslav state. Its leaders were arrested, imprisoned, or executed, and the party itself was forcibly dissolved. The dismantling of the HSS effectively eliminated a significant voice of opposition, further consolidating Tito's grip on power. The suppression of political dissent extended beyond the realm of formal politics. Intellectuals, writers, and artists who dared to express views deviating from the official party line faced censorship, blacklisting, and persecution. Universities were purged of professors deemed ideologically suspect, and academic freedom was severely curtailed. The arts were subject to strict censorship, with works deemed critical of the regime banned or suppressed. This systematic silencing of dissent effectively suffocated intellectual discourse and stifled the free exchange of ideas. Section 4. The Night of the Long Knives, Targeted Killings, and the Elimination of Enemies. The post-war years in Croatia were marked by a wave of targeted killings, often carried out in secrecy and shrouded in impunity. These killings, reminiscent of Stalin's purges in the Soviet Union, aimed to eliminate perceived enemies of the state and instill fear in the population. The victims included former officials of the independent state of Croatia, collaborators with the Axis powers, and individuals suspected of anti-communist sentiments. The killings were often carried out by the UDBA, operating under the direct orders of Tito and his inner circle. Victims were frequently abducted from their homes, interrogated, and executed without trial. Their bodies were often disposed of in unmarked graves or thrown into mass graves, erasing any trace of their existence. The lack of transparency surrounding these killings created an atmosphere of fear and paranoia, as people lived in constant dread of being targeted by the regime's security apparatus. One of the most infamous examples of targeted killings was the Bleiburg repatriations. In May 1945, tens of thousands of Croatian soldiers and civilians fleeing the advancing Yugoslav army surrendered to British forces in Austria. Despite promises of safe passage, they were handed over to Tito's forces, who subjected them to a brutal massacre. Thousands were executed without trial, their bodies dumped into mass graves, marking one of the darkest chapters in Croatia's post-war history. These targeted killings served as a stark warning to anyone who dared to challenge Tito's authority. The impunity with which they were carried out demonstrated the regime's willingness to resort to violence to maintain control. The fear instilled by these killings effectively silenced any potential opposition, as people understood the dire consequences of dissent. The systematic elimination of perceived enemies, coupled with the suppression of political dissent, created a climate of terror that permeated every aspect of Croatian society. The fear of being targeted, imprisoned, or killed for expressing dissenting views cast a long shadow over the country, stifling free speech and discouraging any form of opposition to Tito's regime. Section 5. Land grab confiscations and the displacement of families. The consolidation of communist rule in Croatia was accompanied by a systematic program of land confiscation. This policy, rooted in the ideology of collectivization, aimed to dismantle private land ownership and redistribute land to the state or to peasants deemed loyal to the regime. The confiscations, often carried out with brute force and disregard for due process, had a devastating impact on families and communities across Croatia. Landowners, regardless of their political affiliation or the size of their holdings, were targeted for expropriation. The regime justified these seizures as necessary for the establishment of a socialist agrarian system, but in reality, they served as a means to punish perceived enemies of the state and reward loyal supporters. The process was often arbitrary and unjust, with families stripped of their livelihoods and ancestral lands without compensation or recourse. The confiscations were carried out with ruthless efficiency. Armed militias, accompanied by local party officials, would arrive at farms and estates, forcibly evicting families and seizing their property. Those who resisted were often met with violence, imprisonment, or even death. The confiscated land was then redistributed to state-run collectives or to individual peasants deemed politically reliable. The impact of the land confiscations was devastating. Families who had relied on their land for generations were suddenly left with nothing. Many were forced to migrate to urban areas, seeking work in factories or joining the ranks of the unemployed. The loss of land not only deprived families of their livelihoods, but also severed their connection to their ancestral heritage, creating a sense of displacement and dispossession that resonated for generations. The land grab served as a powerful tool of social engineering, reshaping the rural landscape of Croatia and dismantling traditional power structures. It also served as a means of enriching the state and rewarding loyal supporters of the regime, further consolidating Tito's grip on power. The confiscations left a lasting scar on Croatian society, disrupting communities, creating economic hardship, and fueling resentment towards the communist regime.